All right. Welcome. Today we are talking about operationalizing AI. This meetup is sponsored by marketingfrontier.ai. That is my organization. And we help you with all kinds of AI integration, including use cases, training, tool selection, process optimization, change management. And of course, all of that boils down into operationalizing AI. What we're going to cover today, I'll give a short overview of operationalizing AI. We are going to hear Max's story, and then we're going to talk about some best practices before we open it up to Q&A to learn from each other. All right, by way of introduction, Max, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. I am Max Lenderman. I am the Chief Experience Officer at an agency called GMR Marketing. I can get into a little bit more details into what the agency does. I have been in the advertising and marketing industry for too long. And my specialty is called experience marketing or experiential marketing, which is like bringing brands to life IRL. So sports activations, fan fests, Coachella, pop-up retail, et cetera. That's the space that the agency occupies.
Nice. Yeah, didn't you say you were handing out candy bars, 3 million candy bars last week?
3 million is low. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Stuff like that. Yeah. At the same time, we just brokered a stadium naming rights deal for a massive telco. So it's everything in between. It's the big stuff and then feet on the street, the ladies asking you to check out the Slim Jim.
Yeah, love it. I'm Melissa Reeve. I introduced you to Marketing Frontier. I personally have 25 years, probably more than that, in marketing and marketing leadership. I like to say it's been at the intersection of technology, marketing, and primarily education and training are the three pillars that anchor my background. More recently, I've moved into the world of systems thinking, and I'm working on an enterprise model for AI integration and the concomitant book. So the book is called Hyperadaptive, and feel free to reach out if that's of interest to you. But it's coming to shelves near you in the fall. Okay, so let's dive into some content. I'd like to call this like the executive disconnect, why AI mandates often fail. And you may have seen a recent article that I published on this, and I was targeting the Shopify CEO, and because he was the guy who said no more hiring because first we're going to see if AI can do your job. And I just cringed at that. And I cringed at it because when we're talking about operationalizing I think that's possibly the worst thing a CEO can do is just give that kind of a mandate, especially if it doesn't have any sort of operational juice behind it. It's okay, what does this mean for all of us as employees? What is our communication plan? Does this mean everybody's going to lose their job? Does this mean that our jobs are going to get more difficult because we're going to be left high and dry? I think that it's not helpful. It invokes fear. And I think that the better approach is what I call this middle out strategy. So it's fine to have executive leadership. You absolutely need executive sponsorship and support. But the key, especially in larger organizations, is to activate your middle. So activate your middle managers. This has been just shown time and time again that it is those individuals who can make or break any sort of initiative. And Max, I'd be curious. I'm going to take a pause here and get your reaction to that. Have you seen that or no? Or
It's 100% correct, and yet it's probably in my experience the hardest layer to move, to turn, to activate, to intentionalize into new thinking and new learning.
That's right. Yeah, it is. And you think about that executive mandate again. Oh, AI is going to eat the jobs. Nobody who has a job is going to be like, yeah, let me lean into this thing that's going to eat the job. And so it's going to just freeze your initiatives. So what we're trying to do here is to activate that middle layer, whatever that means. But those are the people who can connect strategy to operational reality. Because another thing that happens, let's just say that it wasn't Shopify of AI is going to eat all your jobs, that instead it was leadership that says, I like to pull on the Unilever thread because they're just so far ahead of anyone else I've seen. they have something that they call future fit. And it's a way of future proofing jobs. So they take a look at all of the jobs that are out there and say, we know your job is going to change. And we are going to work with you to figure out how you can be future fit and stay within this organization. So that's an example of a good practice and a practice that then you can go to your middle of your organization and say, here's how we're going to support you. Here's how we're going to pair with you as you move forward and as AI takes hold. Max, any thoughts or reactions to that?
No, it reminds me of another like corporate management example, the Zappos example, which
Mhm.
maybe Shopify could have thrown into it, which is if you're not a good fit, here's $5,000 to leave.
For sure.
And
Yeah,
so there's always the opt out, and as long as you can create a humanistic way of opting out, I think that's a huge consideration to think about when you think in transformation in the AI space. Is like,
that's
can
right.
you make it easy to opt out rather than fearful to stay?
Yes. Yes. I love that. I think you're absolutely right. And that's all I have to say. So let's talk about operationalizing AI. I'm a big advocate of what I call lightweight infrastructure. And what does that term mean? In my mind, it means that you can't just go out and do the hand wave and say, okay, now everybody go do AI. And I think that's what's happening in a lot of organizations is they just provide a little bit of guidance. Or like, okay, we gave you all access to ChatGPT, now make it happen. And that's too lightweight. It's not enough guidance. People figure some things out, but they need some help. And so the AI Activation Hub is what I like to call phone a friend, right? So this is one or more hubs where you're housing some of that expertise, you're consolidating those success patterns, you're consolidating information metrics. They serve as a coordination point. And if you're in a smaller organization, you might just need one of these. If you're in a large enterprise organization, I'd recommend that you take more of a federated approach or build a network of AI activation hubs so that people are very clear where they can go to get the support they need. I also want to talk about the notion of AI leads. So anybody who has been through a transformation, and feel free to drop in the chat if this is sounding familiar to you or if you've gone through a transformation, AI leads are really your champions. And I like to say in the beginning, in fact, I got this question last night. I was at that RMEG event and somebody came up and they said, Melissa, there's some people who are leaning in my organization, and there's some people who just are, they don't care. They don't care. They're not going to do it. And my guidance to her was to just let those people be for now. We want the champions to get those early wins, to show people what's possible, and then allow people the opportunity to join into a winning initiative. And then eventually we might shift stance and say, and this is what you were talking about earlier, Max, which is eventually we might want to get to a point where it's no, this is moved from a nice to have into a mandate. And if you're not on board, we'll help you gracefully exit. But you want to use your AI leads in the beginning. So the other piece of infrastructure that I recommend people build is what I call an AI knowledge engine. And this is an internal piece of technology where you think about it, let's use AI to power AI. And Max, I'd be curious if you're using something like this, a piece of technology to house your best practices so that somebody in marketing can say, hey, I've got a campaign. I wonder if anybody's developed a cool prompt. And they could just type in, show me a cool prompt that somebody else in our organization has used. Have you considered doing anything like this? Or maybe it's part of your story.
We're in the process of building up an internal onboarding for everything, not just AI, an internal onboarding agent that can answer any employee question, like literally any employee question about the company, which
Yeah,
would incorporate our AI policies and best practices.
love it. Yeah, so I think that's the key, right? Is how can we use AI to help even with internal information finding? All our intranets have been a labyrinth for too long, and AI can really help with that.
That's right.
Okay, and then last, I think it might be last, there might be one more. In terms of operationalizing, I'd really encourage people to lean into something I call communities of practice. If this is a room, I'd have people raise their hand and say who's familiar with this concept. But what we're trying to do here is create what I call learning contagion. And we know that AI is a little bit different than maybe some other learning, where you could have Sage on a stage and they just broadcast out what best practices are. I think all of us have experienced AI in terms of we see somebody doing something and then we start to do it. And by taking this approach, we're learning from each other. And so communities of practice are self-organized groups that align around a certain topic. And that topic could be anything from vibe coding to prompting to how do LLMs work to AI in our industry. And the idea is that the people who are most interested step forward, form their own community of practice. It's self-regulating, self-governing, although you can certainly, in your AI activation hub, have some guardrails and some guidance on how to put these together. And then they decide, like, how frequently do we want to meet? What is our cadence? What do we want to do? How do we want to structure our meetings? And it's a great way to empower people and have them own the transformation. Max, have you experimented with anything like this?
Nothing.
Nothing.
Other than regular meetups and just conversation, like water cooler conversations. The cross team collaboration for an organization, I'll get into the size, for over 600 people, has been challenging. And the skill building is just getting off the ground.
Yeah, I love it. Maybe you and I can have a little chat. I'd love to see how this might work in your context.
Yeah.
Without further ado, let's talk about Max's context. And Max, I'm going to turn it over to you and to share your story about operationalizing AI in real life.
Thank you. Like I said, hi everyone. I mentioned before 20 years of being in the agency space, everything from I founded over 3 agencies now, 2 consultancies, but my love and passion is in commercial creativity and being a creative director. And as you see, for 20 some odd years have bounced from agency to agency, and I'm actually a boomerang to GMR, where I was an executive creative director 15 years ago. But most of my kind of opinions and curatorial point of view have been structured around a form of advertising called experiential marketing. And like I said before, it's what happens in IRL that is becoming a lot more kind of germane and prevalent in terms of how brands are building awareness and loyalty and trial, et cetera. If you've ever heard of the term funflation, funflation is if you could probably see how much more expensive it is to stay in a hotel, to go see a concert. As a matter of fact, Taylor Swift's global tour affected the inflation rate and the interest rate based upon just how much money was being generated in the space of funflation. And what my agency does is bring brands to that party, right? Bring brands into the IRL world of experiences. Professionally, I've written a few books. No, there's plugs. I write for Adweek. I'm a former journalist, so the way I think is usually by researching and writing. That's why I love AI so much. It has given me an amazing co-pilot for my own insecurities and imposter syndrome, but it also has opened up a completely new way of how to get thought out of head and into culture. I teach a little bit at University of Colorado Boulder and I'm part of a number of organizations. So that's all to let you know that I'm not bullshit. Oh, and by the way, I may swear. The vernacular of a creative director is filled with F's and S's. Pardon in advance if I freak you out in that. Quick GMR background: we make stories. I just told you what we do, but it's important to note that we are part of a larger ecosystem of agencies. We're the largest experiential agency within Omnicom. Omnicom itself is the second largest, soon to be largest holding company on the planet in terms of how many individual brands in the agency world, in the media buying world, in the PR world, in the performance marketing world. Omnicom is pretty huge. So we are a tiny little piece of the Death Star of holding companies. And not to say it pejoratively, but it's that kind of gravitational pull that Omnicom has. So it's important to know. Really quickly, the agency does a ton of stuff, right? So when I say experiential, that's just almost an umbrella term for what that means. And a lot of it is consulting, right? A lot of it is around behavioral intelligence and actually designing experiences before building them and releasing them out in the world. And it requires a ton of knowledge, vendor relationships, the ability to build things using sensorial technology, right? So immersive things, projection things, like scent and visual, right? And so if you start thinking about what people are also spending their money on, it's immersive theater or experiential travel, right? So the technology that comes with it, the journey mapping that comes with it, the amount of data that's required in order to understand what drives human choices in the real world versus online is very robust. We have a massive purposeful partnership practice, which is where we're trying to bring brands to the purpose space and community building, and just a lot of digital work that we do as well. So that's just to tell you, like, the span of the capabilities of the agency is pretty robust. And it's good context to know because of where I'm going to take this conversation and my little journey about it, right? It's because when you're looking at a capabilities list of this size, and some of you may have somewhat smaller, others may have even bigger capabilities in terms of the services and offerings, SKUs that people offer, where to apply AI becomes a really key consideration, where choose wisely. Okay.
Yeah.
So this is probably the most germane part of why I was taken on an AI journey at GMR. We have a very robust and proprietary data science practice that we call Soul Science. SOLE stands for String of Lights Effect. Okay. And it's a metaphor, or as an analogy. I should know, I'm a former journalist. I think it's an analogy of considering your life as a really long string of lights, right? Memories, right? And some burn brighter, others are dimmer, right? And so, how do we create these opportunities and experiences to create more brighter bulbs than not, right? So that's where the string of lights effect is. Now, soul science has been a practice that the agency's had for over 17 years. And over 17 years, the agency has hundreds of people out in the field taking literally clipboard measurements of what brands are doing out in the real world, right? So, hey, I was at a festival, I saw insert brand hand, Liquid Death, and there's a measurement of, are they contextually relevant? What is the sensorial technology? What kind of emotional state are people in? Are there tchotchkes? Is there food? Is there whatever? So we continue to measure what brands are doing out in the world. And it's tons and tons of data. And it's allowed us to create, using AI before LLMs and SLMs. We did have an AI kind of practice in order to work with that data in order to create predictive analyses in our consulting business. If you went here and did this, and with these audiences, with these kinds of accoutrements to that experience, we could predict with fairly good estimations of success or ROI or awareness metrics, et cetera. So we've been doing this for a lot, and it's our proprietary data set, which is important to know when we start talking about the AI journey, like where we wanted to take it. So I'm a little bit of a timeline underneath. In February 2024, I was with the chief strategy officer, the CEO, and we had our offsite, as we always do in Q1, and we were just shooting the shit. And we just had a question, right? We're good at insights. Like I just talked to you guys about soul science. Like we're good at insights. We're good at predictive probability of experiences. Wouldn't it be great if we had a better brief? I don't know how much you guys know about agencies and et cetera, but the brief is the kickoff to the creative process, right? It usually has some sort of tension in it, or some sort of, most briefs just have observation in it, but hopefully you have some insight in the brief, like an aha moment of, everyone thinks this product zigs, but we find that if we just zag, everyone would reappraise it. That's a terrible way of explaining what a brief or a tension is, but really it's the way to start to get to ideas, right? Now, what's important also to know in the advertising space is that it's very simple, algorithmic. It's money over time. That's how an agency makes money, right? It's called a rate card. right? And it's how much money per hour does it take for this work to be generated, to be created? And the great agencies have a really awesome brief in order to get to an idea faster. The reason that makes, economic sense is if you can get to ideas faster, you have higher margin. So you have the rate card and so we were thinking about this in the sense of how do we get to higher margin? How do we get to more opportunities to swing at the bat from a pitch perspective? How do we elevate our creative output? Because the saying in advertising is shit in, shit out, right? Bad brief, bad idea, right? So how do we elevate the creative output by a better brief? And that was it. That was the question. Wouldn't it be great if we had a better brief? AI
And
didn't come into that conversation. It didn't until we realized that we had all this data that we needed an AI tool in order to start excavating and optimizing in order to get to a better brief. So we created basically an MVP. We hired a consultancy called Platinum Balloon out of Boulder here. And we created an MVP, and this is the video for it in May 2024 of can we create an interface where a strategist can come in, right? Pick a client, for instance, in this particular case, Xfinity, input a bunch of fields, right? The name, type, et cetera, description of the campaign, things that so this is in May 24, things that you're seeing now emerging, whether it's addaily.co or et cetera. And the strategist would be able to input the things that you normally get from the client brief and a series of experts, right? We call them experts, but now you would probably call them bots or kind of agents, if you will. A series of experts would then be able to deconstruct the brief and allow the strategist to play with it, right? So you can engage in a conversation with the strategist. And after that conversation is done and the strategist is happy with the results, we would kick out this thing called the unforgettable brief, which had a truth, attention, a key question for the creative, and a bunch of creative thought starters. And that was it. That's what we wanted. We said, hey, this is what the MVP would look like. Let's go out and build it. And the key to this was we knew that we wanted a brief. We didn't know that we wanted an AI capable, multi-agentic ecosystem in order to get to it. We just wanted to get a really good brief.
yeah,
Okay,
this is really cool to see.
cool. So on the next slide, we started working on this, and lo and behold, and this is what I was saying in the little bit of a chart on the left, by going and saying, hey, we need a better brief, we actually realized that we need a lot more than a better brief. We need a way to deal with our qualitative data. We needed a way to formulate all our case studies in a particular way so we can build case studies in a specific way so that our kind of like agent can read them. We decided that we needed an agent called the skeptic, right? Which is, I was pushing for it all the time, which is an agent that calls bullshit on everything that all the other agents say, right? Just because that is how the creative process works, right? Someone's going to come in like, that's terrible. Kill that idea, right? We needed to have that ability. So we ended up, like I said, with basically a multi-agentic ecosystem that we started calling the experience engine, right? So this is the engine that starts working these problems out. At the same time, there's on the right-hand side, remember we're part of Omnicom. Omnicom had and has a very robust, a very forward-thinking point of view on how to use AI as well. They created a platform called Omni AI, where within that ecosystem, there's tools, like there's multiple platforms. They sign deals with OpenAI, they sign deals with AWS, they say they have Gemini, they have Sora, they have Adobe, they have the Gettys. They basically aggregated all these platforms into one ecosystem where they're moving people into in order to work with the agents that they're creating. So we started to have, I wouldn't call it competing, but almost complementary systems where our people could start using. There's the experience engine, which is our own proprietary, tuned and trained on our own data. And then there's Omni AI, which is one of the most robust aggregating tools that I've seen to work with many different platforms in one space to just do ads, right? To do ads or to respond to RFPs or to do a voiceover for an ad. Like, so we have ours that does experiential and we have Omni AI that does marketing, advertising research. And it's cool to start seeing how our own proprietary tool is being looked at by Omnicom, going, that's really cool. And then our people within GMR going, how do I get into Omni AI? You have to go through a process, but I want to get into that tool as well. So there's this kind of cross pollination that's occurring. We had all these tools and we had tools. We had this tool. We had this ecosystem that we created, and then we decided to have an AI strategy at the agency. Like we went about it so ass backwards, right? So when
I
was
don't
that?
think you're alone there, Max. I feel like
We
that's
we
just every
started,
company I talk.
we ran, and then we're like, hey, maybe we should have some strategy alignment. So that actually did occur 2 months ago. And our three strategies is really simple: is to unleash creativity with soul science, right? To operationalize the agency process to get to work faster, and protect and optimize our own data at all costs. Those are our three pillars. Pretty simple. And then just last month, we're like, hey, maybe we should have an AI center of excellence. That would be cool too, right? And so we just established it and finalized the charter. And it's really, now we have like accountable teams with measurable KPIs around AI adoption within the agency. And that center of excellence is all C level, right? It's the CEO, CXO, CSO, CRO, CTO, and the chief digital officer, CDO, which is important. So give you a little bit of a roadmap of where we started. We started with a question that had absolutely no AI embeddedness in it. And then we not ended, we're just in the beginning, but where we are today is developing a center of excellence around AI for the entire agency.
Yeah, I love that.
So I have a few key learnings so far on the next slide that kind of brings it together. Remember that we were talking about the middle, right? The
Mm-hmm.
hardest thing that I've actually realized to do for the middle is not to teach them, not to give them best practices or a cheat sheet on prompts, is to somehow get adults to learn how to play again. And I don't have the answer to that, because what's that? Is it Picasso has said an artist is an adult whose inner child never died? I'm fucking up I'm paraphrasing it, but it's something like that. Like, you need that skill, like, or to be able to learn how to play again rather
Yeah.
than learn again. And I think that's, if you could gamify it or make it fun, make it enjoyable, put beers around it rather than decks, I think that's how you're going to get the middle to start to learn how to play again, hackathons and stuff like that. I think it's really, sorry, go ahead, Melissa.
I was just gonna say I want to pause on that for a
Yeah,
minute
cool.
because I feel like what that also speaks to and why it's so important to this conversation of operationalizing AI is it speaks to culture. Is your culture one where it's the people are order takers, right? Like I'm just waiting for an order to come in that I can process, or is our culture one where we innovate and explore and experiment together? And I feel like what you're describing in terms of getting people to play again, it's absolutely, I love everything you're doing with like the beers and the encouragement. And like, how do you zoom out and take that broader cultural lens? And what impact do you have for everybody on the call to maybe, even if you don't have the ability to create culture, influence culture very much in the whole company, like what kind of culture can you create in your own team that makes it psychologically safe for people to play and experiment and fail and learn from each other? Great point, Max.
Yep. It's huge. If I would end on that, that would be the one, because that everything else is okay, fine, but you got to get people to just loosen up about this thing. Like, honestly, focus on the one thing you want. Like I said in my story, we wanted a brief. That's what we wanted. Like, we didn't want an AI brief generator. We wanted a better brief. And this is important because the way I look at AI at the moment, it's like it's a steroid, right? And where you want to inject that steroid is really important, right? But you don't want to make the wrong move. So choose wisely, right?
Yeah.
Because it's also a crack. Like you could get really hooked on it and you're like, it's everything. I want it on everything, right? I want it all the time. That's also not smart, right? So
Yeah.
it's
Like
very
I hear what you're saying, and I think if you don't mind ping-ponging this a little bit, what I see happening is what I call random acts of AI, which is a little bit of that scattershot approach. And last night I was giving it, or 2 nights ago, I was giving a talk, and I talked about how 80% of AI initiatives fail. And I could tell there was like a little bit of a skeptical reaction. What do you mean? And people, I said, who here has started an AI tool and then abandoned it? And almost everybody's hands went up. And I was like, there's your 80% failure rate. Because what's happening is we're just trying all these tools. And yes, experimentation is part of the process. What you all did right is you aligned that with strategy. And by giving it at least a little bit of focus, you can narrow in that experimentation so that you don't have a lot of wasted effort. And it's a delicate balance between unlocking that playfulness, between unlocking the playfulness and giving it enough guardrails that you're using AI strategically. So I
100.
really appreciate your bringing that up.
I have to use this metaphor, but like the steroid thing is in my head. Like that 80% failure rate is someone who takes steroids to look good at the gym. But someone who takes steroids, like a Ben Johnson, if I'm aging myself, to win a world record, that's different, right? To be the
Mhm.
fastest man on the planet, I'll take steroids. Cool. That's intentional taking steroids. Like I get that. I'm not saying take steroids, but I'm using the metaphor. But just because I want to get bigger, that's when you don't. So I think the intentionality, like what we did, we had real intentionality to focus on strategy because if we knew that if we got our strategy, we'd be able to make more money. And
Mhm.
ultimately, unless people on this call are in the nonprofit space, everyone wants to make more money in their business. So you have to isolate what it really is that's going to make you that money. Not to say, hey, if we get operationally more efficient, we'll be more profitable. That's
Mhm.
taking steroids to go to the gym. Saying, hey, we want to get operationally efficient in this one space that we know we're losing money in and we can get better in, that's winning the 100-meter
Mhm.
race in the Olympics.
Yeah, nice. All right, let's keep going.
Cool. The product is the proof. We didn't have a theory. My suggestion is to find a use case and start small with the use case. Like it gets big fast. So just start small with a use case, have a measurable KPI, succeed, then scale it. Don't start with a big theoretical scale plan and then see what happens. Start small. And the product is the proof. And then you get the middle to come along because they actually can play around with that little product.
Nice.
They can get a hands on. This race is a team sport. I know I haven't seen anyone like to your point, Melissa, like meeting up with people, learning from others, trading LinkedIn connections, saying this person did great for me, you should talk to them. That is basically where we are right now. So finding the right partners and finding the right emerging talent that's out there. And if you can bring them in, and if you can't bring them in, partner. And if you can't partner, like coattail and just read what they're putting out there, that's going to be really important. This is a team sport. I've never thought of AI, especially in the agency space, even though all the dire predictions. I've never talked about it as replacement. I've only talked about it as augmentation. The
Mhm.
replacement happens if you can't augment, right?
Yeah.
It's you don't start a priority with replacement. You start with let's give people all the tools to be awesome, and then see what happens.
Yeah, and
So
I have strong opinions here. I totally believe in this. And the, do we ever get to the back of our backlogs? I have never once gotten to the end of my backlog. There's always more that could be done that we have to cut off. And so I feel like AI is an accelerant. Will it replace me? Probably not.
it won't. Look, there's certainly certain intermediary tasks and
Yeah.
mundane tasks that will go away, and there's probably some movement of capital, both intellectual and financial. But ultimately, this is pure augmentation. It's
Mm.
actually awesome. And then the last things, tools are great. Like tools are really great, but learning how to build systems around those tools is the way to go. So just in the back of your mind, like the idea of create a tool, build a tool, but then find the collaborations around it, iterations around it, integrations and other things to add to it. Don't just like rest on your laurels and say, hey, job's done. Because as
Mhm.
you in my story, we thought we had one thing, but in order to get to that one thing, we developed 10 things, and those 10 things became a system. And then once we realized that we had a system in play, then we basically, our entire mindset around AI shifted from, okay, this is an operating system for how we get to great work. This isn't just a thing to get to a brief. And so that tool became a system that created a mindset shift into the approach of how we're using it.
There you
So
go.
create the
Yeah.
system.
Yeah.
That's it.
Create the system. And that's your takeaway for anybody here. The tool leads to the system, leads to the mindset shift. Like when you're thinking about operationalizing AI. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that story. It's just always so cool to hear how it's going in real life. I've got a couple closing thoughts and then we'll open it up. So I talked a little bit about that learning contagion. How do you spread AI? So it's those people who are curious, those people who are leaning in, lean on those people. They're the peers. People want to learn from their peers. Make sure you're amplifying those early AI wins. People are attracted to success. And so let's make sure that we're shining the light on that success and work to just create this environment where learning is the norm. All right, we talked about resistance. A lot of you are experiencing resistance in your organization. How do you move that? So, this is the pyramids. We talked about moving at the bottom of the pyramid. We have a lot of fear and anxiety. We want to make sure we're clear in the communications. And again, that's why I had such a negative reaction to the Shopify CEO with that negative communication. We've got so much fear and uncertainty as it is. That type of communication, not helpful. What is what is helpful is the type of communication that says, here's why we're using AI, here's what we hope to achieve for it, here's the impact on you. We're going to be as transparent as we can in terms of our point of view, and we're going to make it safe for you, and we're going to support you whether you want to jump on board or whether you want a graceful exit. We talked about these support systems. They're so critical. It's critical that you have somebody to turn to when you say, hey, I'm thinking about firing up a community of practice. I don't even really know what one is. It's critical if somebody's, I have a really cool idea for using AI. I know where to vet it. I know who to turn to. I've got either an AI center of excellence or I've got an AI activation hub that I can turn to. These are the things that will slowly move your organization from a culture of fear into one that has a lot of positivity around AI. All right. We talked about communications really is the heartbeat of AI implementations, and I do not think people are handling their AI communications very well. They are not being transparent. They are not being clear. They are not doing it with empathy. And part of it is because the executives themselves are still figuring out AI. So I want to give the executives a little bit of grace and say the time is now for executives to start figuring it out, figuring out communications, and being very clear and getting a point of view around it that people can really hear and understand what that point of view is. Okay, we've got just a couple of minutes. I want to open up the floor. I see one question in the chat. If you have other questions, feel free to drop it in. Sean says, I'm looking for recommendations for copy generation and paid social media campaign management. What are our favorites or what have you heard highly recommended? So I love it when other people jump in. Does anybody want to come off mute and share their experience? Or Max, if you do you want to speak to this one?
I don't have any recommendations because that's what my agency does. So we still use humans in it.
Yeah.
Omni AI certainly has copy generation, paid social campaign management tools. I don't know what off the shelf tools they are, but I would say a perfect question for Chat GPT, web, and deep search, and particularly if you want to give it a little bit more like prompting around what kind of work that is actually needed and what kind of corollary companies or brands that may be using a similar tool already. I would think that this would be a perfect opportunity to get into a GPT and play with it.
Yeah, I have a number of options that I'm currently evaluating for just a single client, small volume campaign. So there's a plethora of tools for all different scales of efforts. And I'm just looking for some small business cost effective options here that they're willing to pay for. And yeah, I'm just trying to save myself some hours and sorting through those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you know what channels they're gonna advertise on? Because Facebook and TikTok and I presume X. I'm not.
It's primarily LinkedIn and
Yeah,
the Meta platforms.
yeah. Because I was gonna say, eventually there's going to be co-pilots in these platforms in order to
Mhm.
create the kind of like campaigns that you want to do. They'll automate, not the actual brand or client. I just don't know how far along LinkedIn is, but I do know that TikTok and Facebook are leaps and bounds in terms of creating that co-pilot UX.
Yeah.
Mhm. And it's a great chat to have with one of the LLMs. You could say, here's the parameters. I'm looking to do this on LinkedIn. Help me evaluate tools. You might have already done that.
Yeah, I probably need to give it the explicit communities to scan for to get maybe more signal, and then like engagement parameters around those different recommendations, and maybe that'll help surface some
Yeah.
popular choices.
You could also do a deep research, and we're going to do a deep research session, I think, in 2 months. But you can do a deep research and ask it to focus on the forums, like focus on Reddit or focus on that to get
Yeah.
more
Mhm.
first party input. All right. I don't see other questions, and I know that Max has a hard stop, so I'm going to move us right along here. If you enjoyed this event, consider coming to one of our upcoming events. We try and make them action-packed and full of value so that you walk away really feeling like you got something out of the session. Super excited about next month. We're going to be vibe coding for non-coding marketers. And so we're going to be walking through how that looks and works. And we've got a special guest coming who is deep into vibe coding. And I'm really looking for, yeah, Matt is awesome. And then we're going to go into an AI deep research session. So this is an expansion of a talk I gave at the Marketing AI Forum. So if you saw that talk, you might have this content already, just giving a heads up to some of our folks on the call who were there. And then in August, what's going to happen to the jobs? So this is what we were talking about, and we are going to dive deep into like very specific roles and how we think that they're going to change with that AI augmentation. So I think that's going to be a really interesting session. More AI goodness. If you go out to marketingfrontier.ai, I think there's a 5-day course on finding your use cases. There's this ebook, Enterprise AI Integration, which talks about operationalizing AI. So that's out there. And feel free to reach out and stay in touch. I think Max is a very friendly kind of guy, and I'm always open to chatting about AI. So we'd love to connect with you. And that's what we have for today. Thank you so much for showing up, for giving us an hour of your time. Max, thank you so much for sharing your story. Such a pleasure to hear how it went in real life.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Nice to meet everyone.
Nice to meet everyone. Take care.